Welcome to the TAO Fireside Chat, sponsored by Crown Castle. I'm Mariah Scott, the CEO of Rantizo, the largest network of spray drone operators in the US. I'm also a TAO board member, and I've been in the drone industry for about 10 years. I'm here today with Keith Miao, the CEO of Birdstop, to talk about drone technology applications at scale. Keith, tell me a little bit about how you got into drones.
Thanks for having me, Mariah. I think a lot of people in our industry, they got their start maybe with RC aircraft or tinkering with this and that. Unfortunately, I don't have that street cred. I started my career working with satellite imagery. This was probably 15, 16 years ago. So satellite imagery, GIS, both in the public sector, and then later I worked in the technology sector before founding Birdstop. So I came at this really from the data and intel perspective. It was clear to me, working with autonomous flying sensors that lived in space, hundreds, thousands of miles away, that if we could have autonomous flying sensors not in space, but at the surface, a few feet away from what you're trying to observe, then we could generate much, much better intel. And so beyond visual line of sight drones, when that started becoming available, was very obvious to me as kind of the holy grail, if you will, of how to get the very best fidelity intel at the lowest cost.
I love the way you talked about beyond visual line of sight as the holy grail, because drones for consumers have been around for a long time, and drones for commercial uses took off maybe around 2016 when the FAA started to write regulations specifically for commercial uses, and so that pilots could get licensed to fly drones. And we started to see commercial uses take off in construction and energy and utilities for survey, inspection, mapping, all kinds of imagery and sensing. But the ability to go beyond visual line of sight was always like this holy grail moment, because the regulations up till now have really required a pilot to always be flying the drone and always be within line of sight. And for a lot of commercial uses, that really limited kind of the growth and the potential. I mean, if you have hundreds of miles of power lines to inspect, and you have to have a guy flying a drone that he can see the whole time, that really limits, what you can do. So tell me a little bit about how Birdstop is addressing those challenges, and it sounds like being able to move beyond that.
Mm-hmm. That's exactly it. Beyond visual line of sight, BVLOS. That is largely what Birdstop is about. To be able to or having to, let's say, drive out for hours and hours, set up a drone, use a remote control to fly that drone around while watching that drone, I think that defeats the point of autonomous aircraft. For us, it's about how can these drones or sensors, flying sensors, already be in position, and you could be sitting hundreds, thousands of miles away and commanding them and getting that intel in real time. That's something we've been working on now at Birdstop for 5 years. We've worked with the FAA over the past 5 years. We have 5 of the most cutting edge approvals to do beyond visual line of sight in the United States. And we've gotten to the point as of this year that we are just about on a daily basis flying without anyone on site, and sometimes from thousands of miles away, the very other side of the country. And so I think we've started to see the original vision we started with 5 years ago come to reality at a small scale now. And with that microcosm built up, the real vision is how can we build a network of these flying sensors across the United States, covering large swaths of terrain, like a telecom carrier. As long as you're
Yeah.
within coverage zone, you can have real-time observation. You can have this satellite system that sits on the surface. And that's kind of what's cut out for us as a next thing to do.
Now, just to clarify, Birdstop doesn't build the drones, but instead you're building this network of these charging platforms, sensing platforms, where, if I think of them like docking stations, big docking stations, is that the right way to think about the network?
You're right. We do not build the physical drone. We would like to be one drone and sensor agnostic, so we can always be future proof and use the best of what's available in whether it's the aircraft technology, the actual drone, or the sensor packages, the payloads that go on these drones, and be able to develop a network that at any given time is always using the best aircraft and sensor technology. That being built on Birdstop's software and AI platform, so that essentially by using Birdstop's mission control, you can tap into this growing network of sensors, and of course, various user permissions will be in there that you will be only able to tap into the sensors that are applicable or that you have permissions to tap into or that map over to your assets. But users will be able to access this larger coverage network that always has the best sensor technology.
Cool. Tell me a little bit about some of the use cases that you see already. You mentioned that nearly every day you're out flying autonomously without humans on site. Tell me about some of those use cases. What does that look like?
Yeah, I think when we originally started Birdstop, myself coming from a satellite imagery background, there were about 25, 30 different industries that we thought this could be applicable to. All of the industries that traditional remote sensing satellite imagery could be applicable to, and several more that observing the Earth from space didn't quite cut it, that we could also service. So from that perspective, our problem was not that there were too few industries, it was that we had more the curse of there are so many things that could use this technology, kind of where should we really focus? And it became pretty evident to us that national critical infrastructure, so power grids, telecom networks, transportation systems, those were very high value assets. Some of the assets we work on are multi-billion-dollar plants that required a good level of securing and monitoring. Other assets being very remote, like power grids and
hard to get people out there.
Exactly.
Yep.
So for all those reasons, our focus thus far has been on what's considered national critical infrastructure. That will probably remain the core of what we do for years to come as we later start layering on more and more industries as the network grows.
Yeah. I think you have to look at, where the assets have enough value that it's worth the investment that one would make to, put up a Birdstop platform or to put up the network and to connect it. And certainly national critical infrastructure kind of hits that, bill, high risk, high value. Assets where they're remote, so the cost of getting a person out there to inspect it and to deal with it is pretty high, and you want to make sure that you've got the best data possible. I'm curious, coming back to the regulatory piece, that limiter around beyond visual line of sight has been an obstacle for a number of different companies. Talk to me a little bit about how you've engaged with the FAA and that sort of 5-year journey to get the regulatory approvals to let you scale.
Yeah, so the FAA, the Federal Aviation Administration, they control everything that flies, or they oversee everything that flies and uses the national airspace. And to the FAA, the most important thing is the safety of the airspace. Although we use a very, very small sliver of the airspace, between 0 and a couple hundred feet at most, That is still the national airspace,
Mhm.
and that is currently an airspace that has a lot of blind spots and has a lot of activity that may be difficult to track. So it really comes down to making sure that we use that sliver of low altitude airspace very safely and to make that case to the FAA. I think when it comes to being able to operate drones without anyone there, doing that, for instance, doing a demonstration of that is is relatively easy. Doing that in a controlled environment, relatively easy. Uh, but where it gets very difficult is when you have to make that work repeatedly, hundreds of times
Mhm.
repeatedly, without a single thing going wrong.
Yeah.
Because a single thing going wrong could be jeopardizing the safety of that airspace. And then doing that in real world environments with all of the intricacies of the real world, be it weather, be it
Yeah.
uh, radio frequency interference, be it any number of other unforeseen things that happen in an uncontrolled environment. I think that's been the challenge, and that's been the case we've been progressively making with the FAA over the past 5 years, that we are able to do this very safely over a very large number of times, and that the thousands of things that have to all go right all do go right. And that's and I guess that's kind of both the fun and the hair tearing out piece of doing this.
Yeah, well, that's what it takes to have a breakthrough, though, right? I mean, it's a lot of hard work and a lot of iteration, and a lot of documentation, and then probably a whole healthy dose of luck too in there, to just have it kind of go your way sometimes. So that's great. That's actually really exciting. As somebody who's been in the drone industry for a long time, it's really exciting to see companies breaking through and getting the business models and the technology aligned with the regulatory approvals so that we can really take advantage of what drones are able to do. I know that, in my own experience, one of the other areas that I think drones have maybe struggled to live up to the hype, maybe the initial hype, is around making that data actionable. So a lot of early drone use cases had to do with imagery, doing an inspection or doing a survey or doing a map, and struggled to connect to making that data actionable. What do I do with it? Okay, now I've got this great insight, but I'm not sure how to value that. And I'm curious kind of your thinking on how you've approached that with your customers, and kind of what you see in terms of how do we make that data actionable so that we know that customers are getting the full value of what we're delivering.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's a great question. That's exactly, I think that one of the things that has held back a lot of great technology is how do you connect it with the value and how do you, that customers experience, and having customers be able to do something with the data that they get. For us, as alluded to earlier, we're not a drone company in the sense of manufacturing a drone. We're very much about how do we use this sensor that can fly and that can now fly in a pretty dependable way and a regulatorily compliant way without anyone there to capture a lot of data that can then be turned into intel. So I think Birdstop comes from the perspective of not how we have a step change in drone technology. There are other great companies doing that.
Yeah.
But how do we have a step change in understanding the physical world? And how to have a step change in having much better data and analytics on the physical world. So, to that end, with all of our customers, we start with what can be done with this intel, be it the imagery, be it real time feeds. What are the things that can be acted upon? And so, feeding that directly into the workflows that customers already have. For instance, if it used to be that you needed to send a helicopter or you needed to send trucks, crews into the field to get this intel so that another crew can then take that and go with the right tools to address that situation, then we are thinking about how do we feed into that workflow so we can give you that intel without first dispatching helicopters, planes,
So you're
bucket
saving
trucks.
all the cost of deploying the helicopter and the truck crew and the people who would have to go out and climb the tower or climb the pole and figure out if there's an issue. Save all that cost and go direct to the second crew.
Exactly, and the
Who's gonna go
safety
fix it.
associated with that.
Absolutely.
The safety of not having an unnecessary amount of people go into hazardous, maybe it's post-hurricane conditions, maybe it's wildfire-prone conditions, muddy conditions, going into remote hazardous conditions, perhaps climbing high voltage or otherwise dangerous structures, doing all of that. We're trying to make it that people do that the fewest number of times possible, and that the times that you used to have to do that just to look at something and assess something, you can now do in front of your computer screen. And only when you truly need the people in the field to do something, to make an intervention, a physical intervention, does that crew need to be dispatched. And they're going into a situation with full intel and situational awareness of what they're getting themselves into, and not going in there they're blind. So I think as much about the cost savings of truck rolls and helicopters and whatnot, it is very much also about the safety of the crews. And we operate in many of the industries with kind of the top 10 fatalities in terms of occupation in the nation, unfortunately. How can we also make a dent on that?
Yeah. I'll say that point really resonates with me for Rantizo. So we operate a network of spray drone operators, and largely the spray drone operators are doing work that might have been done by a helicopter or by a crop duster, which is also huge safety benefit. Both of those uses, helicopters and crop dusters, have a huge safety component. It's dangerous. It's dangerous work, and if you can have a spray drone take care of your field or take care of your application, that's a lot safer for everyone involved.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. I think
Yeah.
that's something I really admire about Rantizo's approach, is that you're not stopping, as I understand it, at the data collection. You are also solving the problem directly to the intervention and lining that up for the end user.
Yeah, we're really thinking about it like a service network, in that you have fields that need to be treated, and we've got a network of spray drone operators who can go out and take care of that in a high quality, licensed, insured, highly precise way. So we're treating the acres and we're taking care of the issues, where previous drone use cases, especially in agriculture, I think were looked at as, okay, you're giving me a map of my field, but I still have a weed issue or I still have a pest issue. And one of the things that we see at Rantizo is that we're able to take that data and actually turn it into action and solve the problem and go deal with that for a grower's field or on those acres. And that's been, it's really neat for me, having been in the drone industry for a number of years. It's really cool to see drones going from taking the images to actually solving the problem, actually giving you actionable data. And in the case of Rantizo and the spray drones, we're really taking care of solving that problem for farmers all around the country. Keith, it's been really fun to talk with you about where we see the drone industry going and kind of what's happening with Birdstop, what's happening in agriculture with Rantizo. I mean, it's amazing to me to see drones being used for everything from spraying Arkansas rice to national critical infrastructure and delivering value all along the way. It's really an exciting time. I know one of the things that maybe is popular in the media and kind of always on the horizon is the idea of the drone taxi. That I'm gonna be able to stand out in my driveway and call an Uber, and a drone's just gonna come pick me up and whisk me away to where I want to go. Think that's ever gonna happen?
I guess I don't spend a lot of my nights thinking about this per se, but I'll answer it with yes, because I think it what it comes down to are some of the same problems that we've just discussed today around being able to safely and efficiently use this sliver of low altitude airspace.
Hmm.
Call it between 0, in this case, maybe a couple thousand feet, that right now is, well, that traditionally hasn't been used, um, for all of these commercial applications, and therefore doesn't have the infrastructure and the safety case built to the FAA. I think as all of the different folks who have an interest right now in organizing low altitude airspace, be it in the case of Rantizo for agricultural
Hmm.
spraying, and us for doing remote sensing and intel, for drone delivery, for the air taxis. This kind of pretty recent emergence in interest in using this sliver of national airspace and building technologies to safely use it and building procedures and
Hmm.
making regulation from the FAA's perspective. I think once that gets organized, I trust that the technology to be able to fly people around will be there in at least that time frame, if not sooner.
I think the technology is not going to be the limiting factor. I think the technology will be there. There's been so much investment and so much really excellent, creative, innovative work happening on the aircraft side. I think the challenge, as you said, is really in organizing that low altitude airspace and making sure that it's safe and that we know how all these different participants can safely interact in that low altitude airspace. And it's doable. It's completely doable. I can't wait to be in my driveway with my phone and saying, pick me up right here. It'll be just like the Jetsons. It's going to be amazing.
I'm likewise excited for the future that we're going to have in this sliver of airspace.
Yep, I hope so. Thank you so much. It was really fun talking with you.
Likewise, Mariah. Thanks for having me.
Thanks.